Okay, guys, hi. So here I am. This is Kurt Radnowski, publisher of Yankee T News, doing a little bit more strangely this time, rather than the usual Parkway Diner because the family's on vacation. I am going to be doing this from the kitchen of our hotel room in Big Sky, Montana. Yep. So bear with me. I got a lot of stuff to point out. Now, I did do this op-ed piece the other day about what's happening with Venezuela and suggesting, quote, it ain't over. Largely because you had some, what I'll call remnants, but they're more than just remnants of the Maduro regime who have stood up and said that they're going to fight back one way or another. Well, this was a curious situation because you had the vice president of Venezuela, a woman whose name, once again, I have neglected to collect, my bad, who has been sworn in as the new president. So, meantime, Maduro's been taken off to New York, but she is expected to follow orders from Washington. That is pretty much what President Trump has said. Now, all of this is very odd, okay? There's so many things about it that you would not expect. Okay, the latest report suggests that there might have been as many as, or maybe more, 40 Venezuelans killed. I suspect most of those were military members who would be putting up resistance when the special forces were going after Maduro. But we'll get more on that later. It's still early. But the hot issue here is that the way I characterize this is President Trump is pursuing what I call a light touch strategy in order to take control of Venezuela as peacefully as possible. Now, some have complained that one should not compare what happened in Venezuela with what happened with Panama, because we like to think of Panama as a success story. Well, okay, I'd like to offer up another contrast, and that is to compare Venezuela with what happened in Iraq. Now, I think the differences are very instructive because a lot of these differences, I believe, had a lot to do with why we failed in Iraq. And I believe President Trump and his advisors have learned a lot of lessons from the failures in Iraq. And so now they're taking a very different approach. So, the biggest one that you need to keep in mind is that in Iraq, we engaged in what was a brutal house cleaning process. Remember the 55 playing cards and how those would be considered the top people that needed to be taken out? One of them, Ibram, I think, General Ibram, was never captured, but many of the others were. And uh, and the problem, of course, is that this process created a lot of resentment. You had this foreign entity, America, walking on their soil, so it aroused the nationalist impulses of the Iraqis and created a counterinsurgency that went on for years. And you can say that was never, the counterinsurgency was never turned back. It was always there. And there's the realization that anytime you go into another country, you're pretty much going to get the same result. So this time, instead, the light touch. And in fact, so light, it inspires that old saying from Machiavelli: keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. And I think that's exactly what President Trump has started to do. First, by having the vice president become the president of Venezuela rather than talking about absolute regime change. And yeah, so he talks about what the appropriate time when everything will be handed over. Well, no one said anything yet about all the different steps that are involved in getting to that time. So I'll give you a couple. Build political infrastructure. You have to put together a team, a top management team, a support management team, who are going to handle all the different aspects of running the Venezuelan government. That's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen next month. But that has to happen if you're going to have a true change in regime. All right? Okay. The so the other part worth considering, although I'm a little skeptical, is that by you are giving people who are the incumbents in this administration a chance to reform. All right, these are bad people. They've done awful things. But hey, if they're going to follow orders and if they don't try to sabotage what America's trying to do, this could save a lot of trouble. So there's something to be said for that, taking that approach. All right. So the other part, another way of putting this, and I mentioned the counterinsurgency, is that if you have a number of people who are still in the administration, they're still going to have a vested interest in being successful, and that will work against forming any kind of a counterinsurgency. So I think, at least on paper, those look like reasonable considerations, right? So I think this light touch strategy deserves time to see if it works out, and it's going to be another complex process because at the same time that President Trump is looking to the people who've screwed up the country to now figure out or to do the things that we're going to tell them what to do in order to restore the country economically for the middle class or for the average man in the street in Venezuela. We're also going to be looking at the challenges of fixing their oil infrastructure. So, yes. Okay. Okay. All right. Good night. Okay. I'll talk to you in the morning. That's my son going to bed. So, the is the other part of this. There's a process. I think that's the important part here, to be patient and have faith in this. The reality, I think, about the Venezuelan oil industry is reflected in a diagram that I don't have in front of me, unfortunately. But let's put it like this. So let's say this is the size of the Venezuelan oil reserves, but then their actual production and exportation of oil is like that, when it should be more like that. That reflects the decay of the whole oil industry in Venezuela over the years as the socialist government just basically raped everything and took it for their own purposes. And on the point about taking it for their own purposes, ladies and gentlemen, I do need to bring up something very, very important. You may or may not have heard about this, but it appears, the name you want to watch out for is Alex Saab, Alexsaab. He and a couple other people are supposedly the ones who have the keys, if you will, to the cryptocurrency assets for the state of Venezuela. Over the years, Maduro and his predecessor Chavez put money into these cryptocurrency assets. They're taking gold, they're taking oil, they're taking other products in which the country had made money. And this was their way of creating what they saw as a store of value for the nation's assets. Smart? Maybe. I think it's the only nation that's done it. But in the meantime, yeah, if someone like President Trump comes along and wants to get his hands on those assets, I think there's going to be a problem. So maybe we'll hear something different. Maybe we'll hear about some other development in a few days. But right now, the understanding is that this gentleman, Alex Saab, is purportedly in control of $60 billion in Venezuelan assets. Well, $60 billion would go a long way towards restoring the country. Just saying. Okay, so the part about restoring the infrastructure is obviously big. There are no instant answers here. But I do want to segue to another part here. The fact that we've shown up in Venezuela has really um, thrown a number of countries for a loop. Russia is the most obvious one. China's the other obvious one. And the other one we really need to talk about because, in a sense, the timing could not be worse for them than this. That would be Iran. Okay, I will just mention quickly that Iran is on the run. Yep, there have been protesters in the streets, and now come reports that the mullahs have been shooting those protesters in the streets. Many of them, by the way, are women. They should feel ashamed of themselves, but of course they don't feel any shame. So you see that, and then the next layer is the news where a memo was leaked from one of the banks, or I guess the central bank for Iran, indicating that financially they are in trouble, and a lot of people may find themselves without any money whatsoever. Right. So the timing, as I just said, is not good here, right? Because um, to a certain extent, it sounds like Venezuela was being a little bit of a sugar daddy for Iran. Not anymore. And now you have these other problems that have developed as the country is facing its own form of regime change. So it's an interesting combination. That's the best I could say about that. All right, let's move on to the next thing here. Oh, also, I just want to mention that there was that picture reminiscent of the one person who stood in front of the tanks at Tiananmen Square in China in 1989, I believe. So here we had one lone Iranian protester standing in front of a bunch of guys on motorcycles, and they were having what looked like a standoff. Okay, uh, but we don't. What came with? He probably got hustled away, tortured, killed. We don't know. Will we ever know? Meantime, the other big news, which you've all been following about, this stuff with Venezuela is amazing how it's just completely overshadowed the Somali fraud. So it's I mean this is the old curse. May you live in interesting times. Well, I think we're living through that curse because now we've had first the problems in Minnesota, we found about Ohio, then Maine, New York, then California, Washington State, and yeah, we're waiting for Illinois. I think Illinois may turn out to be the real dark horse here in terms of the extent of the fraud. So, and we have to keep in mind, I mean, they say that wherever you find a Somali community, you find this fraud. You know what? Come on. They're not the only one. All right. So, oh, yes, this one is interesting. All right. Smurfing. If you don't know what smurfing is, it's a fraudulent act where, let's say I have donated $100 to somebody, a candidate, and the organization then takes my name and and fraudulently says that I donated other money at various times to other candidates. So where I made one donation with smurfing, they take my name and it makes it look like I made 500 donations. Well, yeah, that's right. It's against the law. Yep, that's right. People should go to jail for it, but it's not happening, at least not yet. It turns out that the Somali fraud may have been linked up with Act Blue. I mean, to me, that just doubles the outrage. Smurfing on its own is just outrageous. Just one more example of Democrats cheating and stealing elections. And now you're going to have them linked up with the Somalis, which, by the way, just to throw it in there, I'm sorry, I don't have her name, but that poor woman and her husband who were assassinated by this individual who later said that he was ordered by the governor of Minnesota to kill them, and that she was a legislator who had been voting to clean up this mess, and that Governor Walz decided she had to be stopped. This is incredible. Anyway, moving on. China is pissed. So here we have all this other stuff going on, and they decide to run the biggest, baddest blockade yet around Taiwan. in an effort to say that we are not pleased with what you are saying, we're doing. And of course, President Xi took this opportunity for the New Year to make a New Year's address, reminding the world that they have every intention of bringing Taiwan into their fold as they see fit. Okay, okay. And in the meantime, just to put the cherry on top, they have stepped up their arrest of Christians, how we call house church Christians in communist China. So there are, um, yeah. I mean, I trust that we are on top of this situation, but boy, it just seems like there has to be something that would make the Red Chinese a little bit more circumspect about what they're saying and doing. That doesn't seem to be the case. All right, let's move on to the next big one. Ukraine and Russia. The conflict goes on, the peace talks go on, the bluster goes on, the attacks go on. All right. My friend Eric has every reason to be bored with stuff like this. However, um, the fact of the matter is that Russia does not seem to have any interest in letting up. The latest is that a Russian ship has cut a number of undersea cables in the Baltic Sea, five to be precise. And it's the same old dirty trick. They just have an anchor, they drag it across the seafloor bed, and whatever's in the way gets broken. Well, this ship has been uh, taken, I think, by the Finnish, and we await further news on that. In the meantime, it's the rest of it. I'm just going to call it business as usual. And as if all of this wasn't enough, silver, my goodness. So I'm not a financial expert. I do amateur investing, and I'll just tell you, I am not interested. There might have been a point about a year ago, if I had jumped in on this, I would be sitting pretty with this. But right now, there are too many things that could go in every direction. By the way, I just want to add, I was doing a little homework. Um, so the first thing they'll tell you is that the volume of production and the volume of consumption are roughly equal, with a bit of a deficit because there seems to be a little bit more consumption, and so I guess the difference is made up by going to various reserves. It's by about 100 million ounces difference in a billion ounce scheme. All right, so you've got that going on, but in the meantime, you have this problem with um, silver traders either offering delivery of physical silver or a promise to deliver physical silver called a silver certificate. There are, I forget, maybe I have this wrong, 10, 14 times more silver certificates than there is silver actually available. And on top of that, the amount of silver that's in the COMEX inventory, no one said anything about the London Metal Exchange, has uh, declined precipitously, and there's a very good, it's 32 million ounces. And the argument is you could set off a chain of buying and demanding delivery, and there'll be a point at which you can't do it, and you have to issue a force majeure, and everybody's screwed. So it's like we're on the precipice of this. And as the story goes, JP Morgan said, we're out. That's it. Told all their traders, close your positions, get out of the silver market immediately, if not sooner, because they can see what's happening. Now, all of this said, uh, it would seem that there are opportunities here because you have some countries like Mexico and Chile, which are major silver producers, who could engage in their own form of emergency silver production, although it's still a byproduct of other metals, certain other forms of metal mining. Um, and I think that in this few months, enough silver could be brought back into circulation to put this uh, back on back on track. So that's another reason to not try and play that game. you could find yourself burned because yeah, the people, enough different market forces will have been brought into play that the shortfalls can be made up for. Okay, so now I just have to rattle through just some other things here. Yeah, I was shocked to read it. So my background's biotech, and there's an article pointing out that at least for now, it looks like the biotech boom is over in Boston. And I have to tell you, I remember being in Cambridge years ago, and over the last, say, 15 years, the amount of building that has gone on to create all these different research institutes, mostly about around genomics, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to see it. But if they're not coming through, investors are going to say, you know what, I don't think we want to go down this road. And there are other factors. There's a post-COVID impact here that's still being felt, and that's a whole other discussion. But right now, biotech is on the ropes in Boston, at least a 25% reduction in the amount of venture capital that's going out there, if not more. Yeah, what's the other one? Mandami. Oh God. Look, guys, Mandami. It's still early, right? We don't know what's going to happen, but it's something is going to unfold here. And I think it's going to be interesting because this is going to be an opportunity for Democrat socialists to issue all kinds of apologist statements as he goes from screw up to screw up to screw up. It, the I, I look forward to the excuses. We'll see what they have to say. And all right, the other thing, I got a link up here about what I call the great unwashed of Harvard. This stuff with the remediation program, there's the argument that this happened because of DEI, but it's worse than that. So, yeah, it just, there's just this general sense that they have messed up in so many different ways. And the fact that they have this remedial program for math for freshmen is just, the most embarrassing part of that failure. Anyway, I'm going to move on quickly. There was something called the McCarran-Walter Act of 1952. This specified that Muslims would not hold office. It was repealed, God, I want to say in the 19, at some point around 30 or 40 years ago, it was repealed. But since then, we've seen the rise of Muslims going into office, elected office. So here's the problem I'm having, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody who knows anything about the Constitution, its underlying principles, and you know anything about the Quran, Sharia law, and their underlying principles, you know that the two are mutually incompatible. Incompatible. You cannot have a government based on both. It's one or the other. Now, some will argue there's some overlaps. That's not how the people who push Sharia law see it. Okay, if anything, they're going to want to push the Constitution out and bring Sharia law in. It's their own wish, their own desire. You can see them saying this. What's the problem? All right, so no, I agree. Now there's a discussion to bring back this McCarran-Walter Act. We're going to have to temper what goes on with Muslim involvement in our government because you have so much evidence where they've made it clear, no, no, you white folk, you Americans, you Christians, no, we don't have anything to do with you. We're taking over. That's their attitude. That's their attitude. Oh boy, I wish I could have read it. But anyway, I have a link here for a letter that was written on Christmas Eve by Tina Peters. All right. And I was for her, this has been a time of, I would say, spiritual deepening at great expense. But you can see it in the letter that she wrote. Check that out. And then I put up an overview about food additives. Maha, Maha. I mean, there is a plan, but I don't know. I still feel something's missing here in the way they're doing this. I'll have to get into that later. But the way we understand food additives, is part of the problem, and not enough has really been said about how we should really um, imitate the European Codex for food and set their kinds of standards in terms of what we allow into our food supply. Okay, lastly but not leastly, progressivism needs racism. Somebody once made the point that you've seen so many racial hoaxes, Justice Smollett being the biggest and most obvious, has just simply demonstrated that the demand for racism far exceeds the supply. But the point with this story here is that it's worse than that. Okay, you have seen. I mean, it seems so stupid and self-destructive. I don't get it. If you're going to keep insisting on building all your arguments, all your complaints, all your so-called proposals and policies around looking upon America as a racist country, okay, and deciding that racism is the number one thing that you've got to fight, and it's not there. It's there's some racism, but not to the degree and in the way that they're talking about. There's no comparison. You got to face the fact. I mean, especially all right. If I'm going to say this, last point: white guilt. Okay, so white guilt would be one form of trying to quote improve the attitudes of white people towards people of other races. Okay, but how necessary is it when you look at all the other things that have been accomplished? So I can't help but feel that it's not just an overreaction, it's an overreaction that has gone out into space somewhere. I don't get it. Anyway, hopefully I'll have more useful things to say about this next week. So, in the meantime, thanks a lot, guys, and hopefully talk to you later.